Welcome to the WholeHog Podcast.
But my main concern is I just want to do the best damn job I can for the University of Arkansas.
I got a question for you though, Scotty. Do you know that there's other players on our team besides Desi?
Whoever we had on the plane is all we need. Turn that damn shit on.
Now, here's your host, Seth Campbell.
Welcome into the WholeHog Podcast. Seth Campbell, joined by Scotty Borderline. Matt Jones is going to join us over the phone here in a later segment. But, Scotty, it's time for the part of the year where it was every student's worst nightmare. But for the Razorbacks, this year, they're kind of coming into this week with a proud face on because it's midseason report card week. And the Razorbacks, after having to hide their report card from their parents the past 2 years, are proudly displaying the star sticker that they got from the teacher this year after going 2 and 3.
Yeah, when I was in elementary school and junior high, probably a couple of years in high school, I would definitely hide my progress reports from my parents just because I'm like, hey, we still got a ways to go. Like, I'll get this turned around by report card time. But I was, if you ask my parents, especially my mom, she would tell you that I was not a great progress report student, but report card time, kind of kicked it in the last couple of weeks and did what you got to do to get the grade you want.
You liked it when the pressure was on. That's when you could perform.
Yeah, you just had to lock in at a certain point.
It's Scotty Borderline, pressure performer, locking it in. He likes to go. When it's game day, ladies and gentlemen, Scotty Borderline likes to go. Before that, I don't know. Well, the Razorbacks and their midseason grades, we're going to get to those. They have done very, very well, especially compared to the last few years. Now, there's going to be some lower grades for a few of these things, but let's start with the man up front that gets all the hype in the quarterback. What are you giving the quarterback grades for Felipe Franks, really, because the other quarterbacks have played sparingly?
The only other times we've seen the running backs play, it hasn't been just spectacular.
Yeah.
It's been quarterback runs left and quarterback runs right for minimal to negative yardage.
Thankfully, they've put those on the shelf the past few games.
Yes. Yep. Thank goodness. But at the same time, Arkansas hasn't. If they get inside the 5, they're or they get down in scoring range, they're kind of prone to shooting themselves in the foot. But conversation for another time, I guess. Quarterback's been pretty solid. Like, if you've kept up with the quarterback analysis that I've done every week on Felipe Franks, I think you tend to like what you see. I'd probably give him a B or a B+, and only because and not a better grade, just because I think it's clear that, even Sam Pittman's talking about it, Felipe's holding on to the ball a little bit too long, keeping the ball in his hands a bit too much, and he's scrambling a lot. I think I looked at SEC StatCat yesterday, and Arkansas has, I think, top 5 most broken plays in the SEC through 5 games, and Felipe's done a lot of scrambling, and that means he's taken probably more hits than the coaching staff would like, and sometimes when he's holding on to the ball, he's losing valuable yardage. But
that might reflect poorly on another group that we're going to grade here later.
Sure. I mean, it could be receivers too, just not being able to break free, in the time that you would like to get the ball out of Felipe's hands. But I mean, he's been pretty good. I'd have to go back and look at I need to pull up the analysis I wrote on Monday on Felipe. His passing numbers at various depths of the field are pretty solid. He's 50% on passes, 16 plus yards downfield, and 11 of those completions. Sorry, I can't speak right now. 11 of those completions have gone for touchdowns, and he's averaging, like, on those deep balls, he's averaging over 30 yards of completion, which is really solid. That's where the bulk of his yardage is coming from. And on 11 to 15 yard throws, he's been solid. 11 out of 17 and a touchdown. Yeah, I mean, he's just been pretty good. He's only outside of the 3 interceptions he's thrown. I also chart other interceptable passes, which are passes that should be picked off, like if DBs and linebackers had hands. He's only thrown 3 of those and only 1 on the road. So that's pretty solid. He's been spectacular on the road, like 9 touchdowns, no picks. Kind of got shut down on Monday when I asked Sam Pittman about trying to get Felipe, in a little bit more of a rhythm at home. Like I said, 9 touchdowns, no picks on the road, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks at home against, granted, a really, really good Georgia defense, but also you faced an Ole Miss defense that the week before gave up 1 billion yards to Alabama. You feel like he maybe should have picked that Ole Miss defense apart a little bit more, but he made a couple plays, a couple throws when you really needed it. So it's like Sam Pittman said, he's not really worried about it, but that's what I want to see from him on Saturday.
So what grade are you going to give him?
I give him a B or a B+. Probably go with a B+.
I will go. This is tough. I'm going to go A-. I agree with you. There's been times when Felipe has held onto the ball too long, and you wish that he'd get rid of it. But the reason why I'm going with A- is that if Felipe Franks was coming in after quarterback performances like we saw from Ryan Mallett and Tyler Wilson, and really even both of the Allen brothers, he may not be getting an A- from me. He may be getting closer to a B, just because those were actually competent SEC quarterbacks. Scotty, what he has done at the quarterback position for Arkansas solidified a position that was just so in need of somebody to step up and take over.
But it was worse than bad the last couple of years.
What he's done for that will garner some respect, and that's why I will bump him up. He's brought stability. He's very competent when it comes to when to hold on to the ball, when to throw it away. Like I know I said that he needs to get rid of it sometimes, but that is better than him just throwing up a ball in between 3 defenders and hoping that
I like that he values possession so much.
Right. And so he also has the ability to run, which is we saw key in Arkansas's offense against A&M and could be key moving forward, especially if Arkansas can get the running game going. Then your true RPO, when your run pass option, really kicks up when you can fake the run with a running back and everybody thinks that you can run it with a guy like Rakeem Boyd or Traylon Smith, and then you can have Franks take off and run. So that's why I'm going to give him an A- because of just the stability that he's brought. Scotty, this time last year, I can't remember what game it was, but you'll remember as soon as I tell you. This was the start. I mean, the entire year was basically a quarterback carousel, right?
Yeah.
But this was the start of when it started going really downhill, because instead of going between Ben Hicks and Nick Starkel, which they had done basically every single game up until this point last year, we are a year ago from this week when John Stephen Jones started his first game.
Yep. Yeah, at Alabama, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds right.
At Alabama.
Yep.
Which Arkansas got creamed. So, with that being said, when you look back at where you were just 365 days ago to where you are right now, that's why I give Felipe Franks the A-.
It's a whole new world with competent quarterback play.
You're telling me. All right. Scotty, B+, me A- for quarterbacks. Let's move on now to running backs.
Yeah, it's tough. I think I'd probably go with a C or a C+. Rakeem Boyd, outside of Texas A&M, has not been as productive as we thought he would be. And part of that is because he's been banged up. And the Mississippi State game, I think you wish you could have had him in that game. You probably feel like you would have won a little bit more comfortably than you did. But Traylon Smith, that dude is no joke. He is one heck of a compliment to Rakeem Boyd. But the running game, part of the reason that the running backs are getting like a C or a C+, has some things to do with the offensive line. Like it's not all on the running backs. But Rakeem, I wonder what would the grade be if Rakeem hadn't run for 100 yards and a touchdown against Texas A&M? Would it be even lower? would we go? Would we be going C minus?
You'd be pushing D status.
Yeah, I think so too. But maybe Rakeem is finally healthy again. Maybe there's some continuity up front. The guys on the offensive line are gaining some confidence. And, Traylon Smith was at Auburn. He was awesome. What do you have? 70-plus rushing yards, 70-plus receiving yards. I think only Travis Etienne's done that in the last several years. So that was pretty impressive. I love how shifty that guy is. He's a bowling ball, but he can also make you miss. He's just so tough to tackle, and been pretty sure-handed out of the backfield too. Catching passes from Felipe Franks. That's an area that Rakeem's got to continue to improve at. That running back room just got a little bit thinner with Amante Spivey entering the transfer portal on Wednesday. So it's going to be Rakeem Boyd and Traylon Smith's show. But we'll see if the offensive line can continue to improve. I don't have any doubt that this running back grade could bump up to maybe like a B minus or a B.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't have any doubt that it could, but right now you're looking at you said C, didn't you, or C plus?
Yeah, C plus.
I'm going with a C just because the running backs haven't shown up. With a guy that was an all SEC, now third team, but he was all SEC third team, you expect to have a little bit of a running game. Like you said, running back, it is not necessarily fair. You can't throw a running back out there with no offensive line and expect him to make 8 guys miss. So it does somewhat depend on the offensive line, which is rotated guys in and out throughout the first part of the season. But the fact that Rakeem Boyd hasn't been healthy, which isn't necessarily his fault, but it is going to reflect in his grade. Sorry, that's just the way that it goes. The fact that he hasn't been healthy and hasn't been able to play a lot, that's a problem. The fact that Traylon Smith has stepped up, but still Arkansas can't get the running game going against, they got it going against A&M, but the games before that against Ole Miss and against Auburn, they were okay. I mean, Traylon Smith wasn't okay. He was, like you said, pretty good going over for 70 yards. But I think that there is room for improvement there that makes Arkansas a more balanced team. Whether that is more improvement on the offensive line that can help the running game, or if that is the running backs. I don't really, it's tough for me because I don't really feel like they're missing holes. I don't really feel like they're not in the right position. They're pretty decent at pass blocking. It's just running backs depend on the offensive line. Right now, the offensive line is getting better, but was new coming into this season that was going to be a weak point of the Arkansas offense. All right, speaking of offensive line, Scotty, what is your grade for offensive line?
I think I'd go with a C. The offensive line in the run game, just like going into the Texas A&M game, Arkansas was next to last in rushing yards per game and rushing yards per carry. I think they were only ahead of Mississippi State, and that's Mississippi State, like we said last week on the pregame show, like they're allergic to running the football. That's part of the reason that Kylan Hill's not with Mississippi State anymore. Just it's hard to get a push like this. Think about it. Myron Cunningham is your best offensive lineman, probably at left tackle. Left guard's been pretty solid with Brady Latham. But there's been from center, right guard, right tackle, there's been movement there. Like Ricky Stromberg and Ty Clary have played center. Ty Clary and Bo Limmer have played right guard, and then Noah Gatlin and Dalton Wagner have both played right tackle. And Dalton Wagner didn't travel to Texas A&M. So the right side of that offensive line is a little bit of shuffling going on there. I think they're still trying to find their 5 best. And I mean, that I understand that. Like you obviously you go into the season thinking you know who your top 5 are, but you give certain guys a shot and you tinker with combinations up front and you try to go with the group that's best for you. I think as far as the creating push in the run game, it's been so, not great, clearly, or else Arkansas's running backs would probably run for more yards. but pass protection's been pretty decent. Like I think Sam Pittman made a good point. Like when Felipe Franks is holding onto the ball too long, he's still able to hold on to the ball for as long as he is because he's got decent protection up front. So I think some of the sacks you could probably pin on running backs and tight ends just not holding up in pass protection. Like that's part of it too. Like that's not all on the offensive line, but for a grade through 5 weeks, I'd probably go with a C for the O-line.
The thing about the O-line that is kind of strange is the fact that you don't get the continuity. And for better or worse, we don't necessarily know if that might have something to do with the COVID protocols, which is just a strange thing in this year. Dalton Wagner not making the trip. We don't know what's going on there. So I think that that hasn't helped. But I'm going to go C for everything that you said, Scotty, which I don't really feel like needs to be repeated. They've done all right at times, but just haven't really found a full continuity. All right. Receivers and tight ends, we're going to lump them all into one.
Yeah, I'll go with receivers first. Like, I think it's probably a B. Like, Treylon Burks, when he's been healthy, has been awesome. Like, he's been healthy in fully healthy in 3 of the 5 games. And in each of those games, he's gone for over 100 yards. So he's continued to just be, like Jeremy Pruitt said on the SEC teleconference when I asked him about Treylon, he's been one of the better players in the SEC when he's been at full strength, and he's still that even when he's 80% against Ole Miss, and he goes for a career high in yardage and catches the biggest touchdown.
Yeah, the one time
best touchdown we've seen all season
wasn't full speed was when he got number 1 on SportsCenter top 10. So
yeah, the dude is special. Davian Warren has been a surprise. It's been fun to watch him break out and have I think he caught 3 touchdown passes between the Mississippi State and Auburn games, which was cool to see because he's really had to practice a lot of patience in his career. Like he's been kind of tabbed as just a special teams return guy, but this coaching staff has utilized him in a way where he's able to get the ball in space and use that speed and quickness to pick up yards after catch and, tally some explosive plays, which has been fun. Mike Woods has been solid. I don't know that he's got a drop this year. He's been good. Yards after catch, he could probably improve on. I thought he might have more grabs at this point in the year, but that's you can't always tell how the passing game is going to go. Outside of those 3, it's just been kind of hit or miss. Like Tyson Morris gave you a touchdown catch against Texas A&M. That was like one of the first times we've seen him all year. Outside of he made a couple really nice catches against Ole Miss, but not much else. Trey Knox has been, MIA. And who else we got at receiver? I can't really think of anybody else. So I mean, it's kind of a group that's talented, but it's thin. It's pretty thin in terms of playmakers. But I would probably go with a B for the receivers, and then the tight ends. I'd probably go with a B minus. I think Hudson Henry is starting to come into his own. Blake Kern has clearly given Arkansas more than I expected and a lot of people expected. He didn't have a catch coming into this year, and I think he's got 8 for almost 100 yards. And he's made some pretty big catches. Like he set up a couple of touchdowns against Texas A&M. It's been pretty good. I think those guys are continuing to improve in their run blocking. We saw that a lot. Like Rakeem Boyd or Treylon Smith would be lined up in the backfield. Felipe Franks would motion the tight end over from one side of the formation to the other, and then that tight end would lead the block going to the opposite side of the field, where the side of the field they started the formation on. Those guys, I think they just have to improve in pass protection, but I'd probably go with a B or a B minus for those guys.
B minus. I could give the wide receiver group an A just because of Treylon Burks. Like
that's fair.
I mean, just because. I mean, how the staff is using Treylon Burks too.
Getting really creative.
The fact of we were like, oh, this guy's a great athlete last year. We should use him in multiple ways. And the only thing the other staff did was throw him the ball and then put him back there and punt return. The staff is using him in the run game, in the pass game. I mean, he's throwing passes. I could give him an A. I'm going to refrain and go B+, simply because it is a group effort, not just Treylon Burks, but he has been spectacular. You're exactly right, Scotty. There are guys that are missing. Trey Knox, still a big question mark to me. I think that he is having trouble getting separation.
Tyson Morris has the same number of catches and more yards than Trey Knox at this point in the season. That is not at all what we expected.
I think that's a problem. I think that Trey is just going to have to figure something out. I think that I don't doubt that he will.
I'm wondering if that hip is really, really, really bothering him, like a lot more than maybe is being let on. Because he clearly hasn't been the same since he took that shot at Ole Miss. I think, what was it, week 2 last year?
Yep. I kind of agree with you. And then tight ends, I think they need to be better. I mean, I don't want to parrot you here, Scotty, but I think they need to be better in pass pro. So I'll give them a B- as well.
Yeah, one of the sacks at Texas A&M, I remember that was just Blake Kern got blown up by like a big defensive tackle, and just the force from that defensive tackle running into Blake Kern blew back, and he ran into Felipe, and Felipe just fell like a ton of bricks. Like, the pass protection, I think, is the biggest thing that tight ends group has to improve on. You got to get more physical.
Yeah, all right, Scotty, it is time now to move on to the defensive side of the ball. We're going to do defensive line, linebackers, and secondary. So we'll start with the defensive line. What's your grade for them?
I'd probably go with a C+, and I say that because, and probably don't give that group a better grade, just because Jonathan Marshall's clearly been the best player on that D line to this point in the season. He's like second in the SEC in quarterback pressures, which is pretty outstanding. We had always, I feel like, been waiting on Jonathan Marshall to turn that weight room strength into on the field strength, and kind of make a few plays, and he definitely has. And I think back to some of the earlier games, maybe Mississippi State, where he just, on a 4th and short in the red zone, he just blows up a play and drops Mississippi State for a loss. He's been really good. The rest of the guys have just been kind of average, and nobody else has really stood out. Zach Williams had a pretty good first couple of weeks. I think he had 13 tackles in the first 2 games after he had 12 all of last season, all of his true freshman season. The rest of the guys have been solid, but haven't been spectacular by any means. But I think that's a group that can continue to get better. And I think Julius Coates is going to be a guy that improves throughout the season. Sam Pittman said he played his best game of the season at Texas A&M, so that's encouraging. He said on Wednesday that he felt like he played more technically sound, and the way that you beat talented, big, physical offensive linemen is you be efficient in your moves, and you trust your craft and trust what your coaches have been teaching you in practice. And so, if Julius Coates and a guy like Dorian Gerald, play better than they have the first half of the season. Dorian's been really limited with injury, but if they play well down the stretch of the season, that defensive line could be pretty good.
I think not having Dorian Gerald was big.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Just because he
still leads the team in sacks. How about that? And he's only played what?
3?
1.5. He's played a game and a half.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that defensive line's just not getting just a ton of pressure in the backfield. Like, TFLs are kind of hard to come by at times, and Kellen Mond was able to pick Arkansas secondary apart because they couldn't get pressure. Granted, 3-on-5, sometimes 3-on-6 or 7 if you throw a tight end in protection or a running back, but they got some room to improve.
Julius Coates will be a guy that you can hang your hat on, I think, for the rest of the season. And
that's what they're hoping for.
And what I mean by that is a guy that you're going to be, as long as he's healthy, he's going to be a stud.
He's got all the tools. Like, he is physically imposing, quick. He's got great length, and I think he's got pretty good hands. He's just, it's just across the board. They've got to do a better job of getting pressure on drop back quarterbacks and create a few more havoc plays in the backfield in the run game.
This doesn't make for great podcast, but I'm going to agree with you. C+ is the way to go for the defensive line. Linebackers, though, I'm going to take this one first. You've gotten to go first every single time, so I'll take this one first. Linebackers, you can't ask for much better play out of Bumper Pool and Grant Morgan than what they've given you when they're on the field, which Grant Morgan has been on the field with one arm, but he's still out there. And then Bumper Pool, he said it was some ribs, did he not? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a couple cracked ribs.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't hearing that via rumor, but it was actually true. I'm
gonna give him an A, aren't you?
I really want to. I'll give them the A. I think they deserve the A. The reason why they deserve the A is that they have been an anchor for the defense. They have played well in pass pro for a team that just didn't defend the pass very well. Bumper Pool led the team in tackles last year, which is good and bad when you have your linebacker leading the team in tackles. But the way that they have played, even through injury, I'm going A. I'm going to be positive here.
I mean, both of those guys have the top 2 tackle performances in all of FBS in just 5 weeks. And it was in back-to-back games, was it not? Or not back-to-back games, but so Bumper Pool had 20 at Mississippi State, and then against Ole Miss 2 weeks later, Grant had 19 in the pick 6.
I just think that the leadership that those guys have brought as well. Grant Morgan being named a captain has shown what his teammates think of him as a leader, and I think that is shown out on the field of the toughness and grit that comes with the Morgans has been displayed in this team. What you got?
I think both of those guys are captain quality. Clearly Grant Morgan he's one of the more vocal, outspoken guys on the defensive side of the ball, and that also kind of runs in the Morgan family. They're not to say that they're loud, but they make themselves heard, and they back their play up, or they back that talk up with their play. I'll probably give them a B+, and the reason I don't go any higher is just because outside of Bumper Pool, Grant Morgan, and Hayden Henry, the depth isn't there,
which is valid.
Yeah, but you can't really ask for more out of Bumper Pool and Grant Morgan, and even Hayden Henry, the wide-eyed crazy child at linebacker, kind of the throwback style player. He was really good, when Bumper Pool couldn't play because of the ribs. Grant has been outstanding just playing through injury. I can't imagine how much pain he's going through. I mean, he's coming off the field after, right before Ole Miss ran that fake punt and converted it. He was coming off the field and he was just that left arm was just hanging. But he goes back on the field the next time Ole Miss has the ball, and he, kind of makes up for dropping a couple of picks earlier in the game and seals it with a pick 6 and uses a little bit of his running back vision from Greenwood High School, makes a guy miss and put him on skates. He's been really impressive. Bumper Pool's been really tough too. I can't imagine playing with cracked ribs. That just sounds absurd. That would put anybody else down and out.
You don't realize how much your ribs move until you think about put your hand on your ribs and breathe.
Yeah.
They move every single time you take a breath. If your ribs are moving every single time you're taking a breath, imagine how much they're moving when you're actually running on the field and how much pain that must be. That is one of the hardest injuries. Besides injuries that really take you out and require surgery, that is just one that is not going to heal very well because it's constantly moving.
It's a really debilitating injury, outside of an ankle or a knee or maybe a shoulder. That's got to be about as bad as it comes. But those 3 linebackers that I mentioned have been really good. And I think we're probably going to see a little bit more of Hayden Henry just because he's so physical. He can run sideline to sideline, and he just kind of plays with a reckless abandon. And maybe if Bumper if he maybe re-aggravates that injury, or he's not 100%, I think Hayden Henry's a pretty good substitute to have.
All right, moving into secondary, a group that you thought coming into the season, you probably would have Jarquez McClellan and Jerry Jacobs leading you at the cornerback positions. That hasn't happened. And yet it's still probably one of the most improved groups that we've seen. Scotty, Jalen Catalon is going to be a star, I think, at the University of Arkansas.
Agreed.
The way that he comes through and just lays the lumber on guys.
Yeah, he's had a bunch of tone-setting hits this year.
I think that without a doubt, he will be one of the better defensive players to come through the University of Arkansas. I definitely see a pro career in his future and a guy that is going to be a cornerstone of the defense next year and every other year that he is here at the University of Arkansas. That being said, I owe you a grade. I'm not going to go as high as the linebackers because they did get picked on a little bit against Texas A&M, and that's what's fresh in my mind. But that's, as you said, that's not all the secondary's fault, because if you're dropping back 8 guys playing zone and the defensive line doesn't get any pressure, then
a good quarterback's going to find windows.
Which Kellen Mond, as we established on this podcast, is a good quarterback. So I'm going to go with a B for the secondary. A group that probably could have very easily gotten a D before the season started, and for their performance last year, very, very much improved.
Yeah, I'm going to give them an A-, actually. Hudson Clark has clearly been the surprise on the defensive side of the football this year, kind of given an opportunity to play more snaps just because Buster Brown got hurt in week 2. But I remember he was in on he played a part in breaking up a pass to the end zone against Mississippi State. And then in his second start, he picks off 3 passes, just in the right place at the right time. And I get that a little bit of that was probably just Matt Corral being a little bit of a wild card for Ole Miss at quarterback. That he's been really good. Like the secondary's just been really good. Jalen Catalon's got a pick 6. Hudson Clark's got 3 picks. Buster Brown's got 1. Joe Fouche's got 2. Like, there's just playmakers littered throughout that secondary. They did get a little bit exposed against Texas A&M, obviously. But that group, I mean, you can't argue with their production in terms of like takeaways to this point. And I think Jalen Catalon has also forced a fumble that was recovered by another defensive back in Miles Slusher. So I'm gonna go with an A- for that group.
All right, Scotty, and then it's time for the most favorite. And yeah, I stuttered there because I was gonna say worst and didn't know if I was gonna say that or not, but I'm definitely going to. And the worst group in the midseason report cards. What are your thoughts on the special teams?
I'm gonna give the special teams a D. Nothing. You've got nothing in terms of kickoff return. I think you've got 1 kickoff return for 10 yards, and you've got 1 punt return for -1 yard. And so you've got infinitely more interception return yards than kick return yards. And I think Arkansas might have more fumble return yards than kickoff and punt return yards combined. So that's a problem. And then you get into a couple of blocked punts, a couple of missed field goals. Like, Arkansas can't bank on getting 3 points, outside of 40, 45 yards anymore. That's a little bit of a problem. A.J. Reed hasn't been bad this year. The 2 kicks he missed against Texas A&M were the first 2 that he's missed all year. But he hadn't hit any. I don't think he had hit anything outside of 40 yards to this point. Is there anything else I'm missing? Punt coverage hasn't been great. Like, I think teams are averaging about 10 yards per punt return, which that's less than ideal too.
And they've given up some big blunders in big spots. I think.
The fake punt that they allowed against Ole Miss was not a good look. And then you throw into account like the kickoffs out of bounds and the illegal formation penalties. We've seen that rear its head a couple of times. It's not been a good first 5 games for the special teams. So I'm going to give them a D.
I think a D is generous. if there is a group on the Arkansas team that deserves an F, I think it is the special teams. But I'm going to be one of those nice teachers that you had in elementary school. I'm going to show pity to where I don't want to fail this group. Maybe it's because I don't want them to be in my class next year. And so I'm just going to keep passing them on to the next teacher. But I'm not going to fail them. I am going to give them a D- and say, all right, this is our midseason report card. There is still time to pull a Scotty Bordelon, pull this bad boy out, hide the midseason report card, and come here at the end of the season and go, oh, you finished with a B-. That's respectable. That's what you were doing all year long, right? That's what you were tracking with. There's still opportunities to set up a punt return for a touchdown with Traylon Burks back there if he wants to continue to field punts. There's still the opportunity to not cost people games, to win games with your special teams kicking wise, to where you can have a guy maybe redeem himself a little bit after missing 2 40-plus yard field goals at Texas A&M. There's still opportunities, but right now you're going to take the D- and you're going to learn from it. Because right now the special teams is awfully pathetic.
Yeah, it's not great.
Not
Maybe the back half of the schedule is when we see a little bit of improvement, but still at the same time, like if you're not fundamentally sound in your protection in terms of keeping guys away from your punter, Alabama's going to come at you. LSU's having a down year, but they've still got athletes to rush the punter. Like you just absolutely have to be more fundamentally sound in all areas, really, in special teams, the back half of the schedule, if you want to be competitive and potentially beat the teams that you feel like you've got a shot at in the back half of the schedule. Because you think Missouri, LSU, Tennessee, is there another game? I feel like those are the 3 games that you're most confident in the back half of the schedule. But you got to do everything right, and that definitely includes special teams. I can swing a ball game.
Does indeed. All right, Scotty, those are our mid-season report cards. We're going to hit the break, but when we come back, we're going to get Matt Jones on the phone, talk a little bit about Tennessee and this upcoming game with Matt. So stick with us.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the WholeHog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for WholeHog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The WholeHog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back into the WholeHog Podcast. Seth Campbell joined now by Matt Jones via the phone lines. Matt, thanks so much for joining us, and let's just get right into it. Arkansas playing Tennessee, a team that they haven't just had a lot of success with in the past. I believe the overall series is 13-5 in favor of Tennessee, and the Razorbacks are on their longest winning streak against Tennessee right now, which is 2 games, dating back to what was that? 2011 and 2015, the 2 wins that they had. So a team that they haven't had a lot of success with in the past, but they seem pretty evenly matched going into this game.
Yeah, and I was going to say they've won 3 of their last 4 against Tennessee since 2006. That was the game that game day came in. It's always been a frustrating series, I think, for Arkansas. When the Razorbacks came into the SEC, I think Tennessee, for a lot of people, kind of reminded them of the Texas series, from their days in the Southwest Conference. Arkansas won the first one in 1992. Todd Wright kicked a field goal with just a couple of seconds left on the clock, and Arkansas stunned Tennessee when they were undefeated and ranked number 4. But after that, it was a lot of tough years against Tennessee. I remember in 1995, Tennessee came here, and it's the first top 25 matchup that the Razorbacks had been a part of since they joined the SEC. That was Peyton Manning's sophomore year. He had a real big game against them. In '96, Peyton Manning had some really big games against Arkansas. He was a 4-year starter against them and went 4-0. The game I kind of remember is in '97 down in Little Rock, a really, really cold game. And I think Manning actually threw a pick six that helped Arkansas kind of get into that game, but they ended up losing 30-22. Of course, everybody knows about the Sterner play and the Sterner redemption. It's just been a fun series. I think it's been a challenging series for Arkansas because they've found some ways to lose that have certainly been heartbreaking. But when you think about just memorable games against SEC teams, if you're a Razorback fan, there's probably as many memorable games against Tennessee as there's been against any other team in this league since they came in about 30 years ago.
And taking all of that into this week's game, what do you see from, Tennessee that they do well? I mean, they've got a experienced quarterback in Garantano, but he's had some trouble this year.
Yeah, he has. And, none of that history really means anything going into this week. It's fun for people who have watched the games to talk about. Tennessee, they started out 2-0. Now they're 2-3. They've lost 3 straight rivalry games against Georgia and Kentucky and Alabama by a combined 81 points. They did not look very good in either the Kentucky or the Alabama game. They were actually beating Georgia 21-17 at halftime, and then Georgia just came out in the second half and blew them out. There were some turnovers in the second half of that Georgia game. 2 pick sixes against Kentucky. That was the same day that Arkansas returned a couple of interceptions for touchdowns against Ole Miss. And then, they didn't look good against Alabama. And one of the things that has been consistent throughout this 3-game losing streak for Tennessee is that they've had a turnover returned for a touchdown in all 3 games. I mentioned the pick sixes against Kentucky. There was a fumble on, I think, the second or third play, the second half against Alabama that the Crimson Tide took back for a touchdown. And I believe there was a pick six in the Georgia game too in the second half that kind of helped, the floodgates open in that one. So, it's an interesting game because Arkansas has been so good at taking the ball away. They didn't do it in College Station last week, but, in the games that they've won against Mississippi State and Ole Miss, I think they've forced something like 9 or 10 turnovers. And that doesn't count that there were 2 or 3 or 4 other instances in those 2 games where the defense, forced a turnover on downs. And so, turnovers are something to watch this weekend. Garantano, though, what's interesting to me about him is that the 2 biggest games in his career, statistically and probably just overall, were against Auburn in 2018 and Missouri last year. And both of those games came after bye weeks for Tennessee. And Tennessee's 2-1 after bye weeks under Jeremy Pruitt. Mentioned the Auburn game a couple of years ago. They lost to Georgia last year after a bye week. And then they beat Missouri. And I think that Missouri game is really interesting because Garantano threw for 415 yards that day against a top 10 Missouri pass defense. You remember how good they were against the pass last year? I think they were something like 6th or 7th nationally. And that was a pass defense coached by Barry Odom. And so I definitely think that there's going to be some interesting I think both the Arkansas defensive staff and Jim Chaney's offensive staff at Tennessee are going to be watching that Missouri game to see if there's anything that they can take away from that game last year that might be able to help them this week.
Talking to Matt Jones here on the WholeHog Podcast. Matt, how big is it that Tennessee has lost the previous 3 games that they've played, and the fact that they had a players-only meeting and they had the turnaround at midseason last year, and they're kind of looking to do that again this year?
Yeah, they had a change on their coaching staff too. They fired their defensive line coach after the Kentucky game. I think the 3 losses certainly play a factor in this. I think this is a really, really big game for Jeremy Pruitt's future at Tennessee. He's in his 3rd year there. I think he's something like 15-15, maybe 15-16 at this point. Certainly hasn't been the type of turnaround that I think people expected from him. And maybe they thought it was turning around going into the year, but then you have these 3 straight losses against rivals. You can't lose to Kentucky by 27 in Neyland Stadium when you haven't lost to them since 1984. So this is a big game for him. And this is a big game for his future. And I think Arkansas is going to get a really good shot from Tennessee on Saturday night. I just think that the combination of the bye week and a combination of some of the things that Texas A&M showed. Tennessee is a very similar team to Texas A&M, especially along the offensive and defensive lines. They do some things different with their defense than Texas A&M does, but this is a big-time Tennessee team along the offensive front. I mean, you're talking about, right tackle Cade Mays, 6'6", 320, 6'5", 310, 6'3", 300, 6'5", 320, and they're all redshirt seniors or juniors. I mean, they're a very experienced offensive line, and so I think it's going to be a tough game for Arkansas. And then you throw in, on top of, just the man-to-man matchups, that motivation that, I feel like Tennessee is going to have to be playing for their coach, to kind of be playing for their season, trying to make it to where this isn't a lost season yet. I think the Razorbacks are going to get a pretty good challenge on Saturday night.
When you look at last week's game against A&M and you compared Tennessee and A&M to each other a little bit, how do you think Barry Odom and the Arkansas defense will mix up their game plan?
That's a good question. I think that Tennessee is going to be more prone to run the ball than Texas A&M did. It's a similar deal, though, to last week, to where you pick your poison a little bit more. Remember, we talked after the Ole Miss game that Arkansas was giving Ole Miss the run, and Ole Miss just really wasn't taking it. And part of that had to do, I think, with Ole Miss got behind, and so they had to throw the ball a lot. But, there were running lanes there, and Arkansas was dropping 8 back. And I think Ole Miss could have run the ball against Arkansas had it wanted to. They just decided to go with their passing game for whatever the thought process was. I think Tennessee is going to be, like A&M, more of a run-first team, but I think Tennessee is going to run it more often than Texas A&M did. I don't know if they trust Garantano to make some of the plays that Mon made for the Aggies last week. So I think it's probably a similar plan to the A&M game, but I think that there's probably some differences there too, just because of the tendencies that Jim Chaney has shown. You've heard Sam Pittman talk all week that if Jim Chaney could, he'd run the ball 75 times a game. And there's a lot of familiarity there between the two of them. Of course, they work together at Arkansas. They work together at Tennessee and at Georgia. And I'm interested to see how that comes into play too. Pittman's familiarity maybe with Chaney's tendencies in play calling, because I think that there are some tendencies there. And I think that's one of the reasons that he wore out his welcome so quick with the Razorbacks, and why he left Georgia after 3 years.
I was just about to bring that up, Matt, is the fact that Jim Chaney, Sam Pittman have been so close and coached at so many spots. Do they know each other a little bit more? And as you mentioned, can play off of those tendencies?
Oh, absolutely. I think they know each other just about as well as, any two people can. And some coaches do a good job of not repeating tendencies. And, so it really doesn't matter what the familiarity level is. But there are some coaches who don't. I remember, I think it was maybe 2009 when Auburn came in here, and it was Gus Malzahn's first year as Auburn's offensive coordinator, but they had been here the year before when he was the offensive coordinator at Tulsa. And Willie Robinson had been the defensive coordinator for both of those games. And, Robinson mentioned after the Auburn game that they just went back and watched the Tulsa game from before, and they saw all of these tendencies in Tulsa that were able to, kind of give them a heads up as to what Auburn was going to do in certain down and distances and situations in the game. And that's why they played Auburn so well in 2009. So that's always the challenge for an offensive coordinator, or even a defensive coordinator, any type of play caller, is to, never really have the same tendencies, or to try to mix up your tendencies enough so that people can't, predict what you're going to do. And, I've always thought that Chaney was kind of predictable in his play calling. And so I certainly think that there might be, some of that to watch Saturday night.
All right, Matt. Well, thanks so much for joining us here. Did we miss anything before we let you go?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, Matt Jones joining us here on the Whole Hog Podcast. Matt, thanks so much.
All right, appreciate it.
All right, guys. Well, we will be back after this short break, and we are going to give you some predictions about the rest of the SEC. So make sure to stay with us here on the Whole Hog Podcast.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today, WholeHogSports.com.
Welcome back into the Whole Hog Podcast. And all right, it's time now, Scotty, for you to peer into your magic 8-ball, be Zoltar for a minute here, and figure out some SEC predictions of how the SEC is going to finish this year. I think that this is going to be an interesting finish to the year, and I think I have a few bold predictions, but I'm not for sure. But we're going to start with the top of the conference. Alabama is the odds-on favorite to win the SEC West, right?
Yeah.
I mean, without a doubt. Really, they look like the best team in the SEC. In the East, though, Georgia has one loss to Alabama. Florida has one loss to A&M. Who do you see going to compete with Alabama in Atlanta?
If I had to guess right now, I would probably say Florida. And I know Florida, Georgia is like one of the headliners of this upcoming weekend, big cocktail party in Jacksonville. That's always a fun game. That's always a game that gets a little bit weird. You see tend to see some of the wildest plays in college football, tend to kind of come out of that game just because you get a couple rivals together, and Dan Mullen can be a little bit unpredictable. Clearly after last weekend, but yeah, that's a game that I think is going to be a tipping point in the SEC East. Clearly, I think Florida may have the upper hand just because its offense is so explosive. Like Kyle Trask is a legitimate Heisman candidate in my eyes. Kyle Pitts is probably going to win the Mackey Award.
Yeah.
If Arkansas didn't push Jalen Weidermeyer into the conversation. But Kyle Pitts is really good. My only concern with Florida is their defense. Like early in the year, I forget who they were playing, but they could not stop the run, and they gave up a bunch of points to Texas A&M on the road. That's their only loss, which losing at Texas A&M this year is, it's a lot of teams are going to do that. Like they're going to go to College Station and lose. Texas A&M is really good on both sides of the ball, but I would say that I would probably give the edge to Florida. I'm a little bit concerned in terms of Georgia with Stetson Bennett. Can Stetson Bennett get you there? Can he get you over the top?
Yes.
And then Richard LeCounte is coming back. He's just a few days removed from the hospital, like after having a motorcycle or a motorbike accident when he got back from Kentucky last weekend. So what's his status going to be for the Florida game? You feel like Richard LeCounte's one of like the very few guys in the country who could legitimately match up with Kyle Pitts, but we don't know what exactly his status is, how healthy he's going to be, and if he'll be able to make like a huge impact, because he's a difference maker on defense. I'd probably give the edge to Florida.
I'd give the edge to Florida as well. I agree with you. You asked the right question, is can Stetson Bennett get you there? And I think that's a no. I think that at some point, is it DeJuan Mathis, or is that was the guy that started?
Yeah, he started against Arkansas.
The USC transfer is
JT Daniels.
And I think at some point you got to give the reins over to Daniels. I know that's hard because Bennett has done enough to get you wins against every team except for the class of the conference in Alabama. But if you want to get to the college football playoff, you're going to have to beat Alabama. You're going to have to beat the winner of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Florida or Georgia is going to have the inside track, obviously, to Atlanta. But if the winner of that game, because they already have one loss, if they want to get into the top 4, they are going to have to beat Alabama. And I don't know that Stetson Bennett is the guy that's going to do that if you're Georgia. Meanwhile, Florida has weapons. And like you said, the defense is a concern, but I'm saying that Florida is going to beat Georgia on Saturday and that they will have the inside track.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not saying that Stetson Bennett's a bad quarterback, but he is not the same player as a Jake Fromm or an Aaron Murray or, some of the more prototypical Georgia quarterbacks. He is not those guys. I just don't think he can get them over that hump and, into kind of the elite of the elite status.
I agree. All right, but as we're talking about the elite of the elite, we mentioned Florida and Georgia as teams, that are going to compete in Atlanta or could compete in Atlanta. Do you think they have the best shot besides Alabama of making the college football playoff? The SEC. So an SEC team. Which SEC team besides Alabama do you think has the best shot of making the college football playoff?
I mean, I think it could be Florida. If Florida, gets to Atlanta and beats Alabama, I think that's their best path. Texas A&M could, but I think it's an outside shot. I'm not completely sold that A&M is in that elite tier. Like, they're a very, very, very good football team, but I think better teams than Arkansas would be able to maybe slow down that Texas A&M offense when really they've only got three guys at receiver and tight end that you really feel like they trust. There's Chase Lane, Weidermeyer, and Ananias Smith. I feel like really good defenses would be able to key in on those guys and might be able to slow their run game. I know Texas A&M's got a really good O-line. Isaiah Spiller's really good. And you mix in like Devon A-Chain and Ananias Smith in the run game, they're pretty solid. But I'm just not completely sold that A&M is, in that top tier in the SEC yet.
So I think that the best opportunity for an SEC team to get into the college football playoff is A&M. And I know that you're thinking about it and you think that I might be crazy because whoever wins the Georgia-Florida game, as I said, is going to have the inside track, and whoever plays in Atlanta might have the most straightforward path to the college football playoff. It's simple, beat Alabama. But that simple task, I think, is the hardest. Alabama's one of the top 2 best teams in the country this year, them and Clemson. So I think that is where A&M can get into the college football playoff because I don't think anybody else that has to play Alabama is going to beat Alabama right now. And so you can have A&M with only one loss to Alabama. You can have them sneak into the playoff because here's the rest of their schedule, Scotty. South Carolina, Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, and Auburn. None of those games scare you if you're Texas A&M.
Right.
And you mentioned that you're going to have good defenses, may force that offense to look bad. I don't really see a good defense in their remaining schedule.
Something else I think that could play a big role in this, like if you're, say, Florida beats Georgia on Saturday or Georgia beats Florida on Saturday, maybe if you're Texas A&M fans too, I think you ideally want to see Clemson without Trevor Lawrence beat Notre Dame because right now Notre Dame is in that top 4. I think they're ranked 4th in the latest AP poll. So if Notre Dame loses to a Clemson that doesn't have that's playing Clemson's backup quarterback, as good as he may be, that's not Clemson at full strength. So you don't think Notre Dame can hang with Clemson if they were full strength, and that knocks Notre Dame down a little bit. Plus, I think that game is at Notre Dame too. So I think if you're A&M fans, Florida fans, Georgia fans, I think you wanted to see Clemson beat Notre Dame with its backup quarterback, because I think that would knock Notre Dame down a peg.
You need Clemson and Alabama to take the top 2 spots. So you need both of those teams to win out if you're a team that wants to get a second team in from your conference. you got to look at the Pac-12, and with the schedule that they have, I think they're going with a 7-game conference schedule. And the fact of it is 7 straight weeks, and they are just banking on nobody getting COVID or games being delayed because of COVID, which we have seen just doesn't happen. I don't know that there's a viable option in the Pac-12. I don't know that there's a viable option in the Big 12, especially if you have a team, say Oklahoma State.
I don't think there are any more undefeated teams in the Big 12.
There
anymore.
aren't, but maybe a one-loss Oklahoma State team might have an argument against a one-loss A&M team. The problem is that if you get a 2-loss Oklahoma State team, because if they end up losing to Oklahoma, the Big 12 is going to just push themselves out of the playoff. So then you have a team from the Big 10, which is probably going to be Ohio State. So you have those top 3 spots, and then you look at the next team. That very well could be a team like A&M. So I think that's where their shot lies.
It could definitely be that next team that didn't quite make it to the SEC championship, who's just kind of waiting on another domino to fall. Or, if Florida makes it to the SEC title game and loses, I think they could be very easily next in line for that final spot.
All right, Scotty, 2 more questions here as we wrap it up on the Whole Hog Podcast. One, we're going to go with an Arkansas-centric question. Right now, the Razorbacks are tied for 4th in the SEC standings in the West. Ole Miss, Mississippi State below them. LSU tied with them. They have games against LSU. They have a game against Missouri, which Missouri is also 2-3 in the conference, which is just the schedule issue. So Missouri's 2-3. Do you think season in Arkansas is finished 4th or better in the SEC West?
I think it's very possible. I think Arkansas is going to get out of this season with at least 4 wins. And so put them tell me who LSU is going to beat right now. Mississippi State is like dead in the water. Ole Miss seemingly can't get out of its own way unless it plays Vanderbilt. And there are no more Vanderbilts on the schedule. And so I think Arkansas, of the teams that it could finish above, I feel most confident in Arkansas right now. Clearly have the most stable quarterback play. Defense has shown the most promise out of any of those teams. I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas finishes 4th. I'm gonna guess that Arkansas ends up winning 4 games, potentially 5.
I think if you look at the schedule, I think 4 games is a spot on there, Scotty. LSU's schedule doesn't get any easier. So they just came off the bye week. They're going to play Alabama, Arkansas, A&M, Ole Miss, and then Florida. Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah, it's a tough stretch.
That is absolutely brutal because you had that Florida game that got postponed. So I don't see LSU finishing ahead of Arkansas. I
really don't either because, I'm keeping up with what's going on with LSU's quarterback situation. Miles Brennan tried to practice, or he did practice in full uniform the other day, and Ed Orgeron said he did not look good. So he's doubtful for Alabama, and that means you're going in there with a true freshman. And what is his name? TJ Finley, or I think his last name is Finley. From Ponchatoula. Man, you just don't feel good about going into Alabama with a true freshman. You don't feel good about going into Alabama regardless, but that's especially the case with a true freshman.
And a team that may be looking to exact a little vengeance after what you did to them last year. All right, last question here, Scotty. In this weird COVID year where teams are kind of hurting for money a little bit, do you see a coach in the SEC getting fired?
I hate to do that with coaches, but it could easily be, if Tennessee doesn't get things on track, it could be Jeremy Pruitt. And if Vanderbilt continues on this trajectory, Derek Mason's probably going to go. And I hate that because I really like him. Mm-hmm. I think Vanderbilt's just such a tough job, man. It's just because football and sports are just Vanderbilt's a really good academic school, and sports are just, when Vanderbilt football is really good, it's almost like it's a feel good story more than like we want to continue. Obviously, they want to continue to pursue success and have success, but I just don't see it happening at Vanderbilt clearly. And I think the two coaches in the state of Tennessee are probably the most likely to lose their jobs at the end of the season.
I think the Gus Bus in Auburn, his buyout being so large and the performance that they had against LSU probably saves him for another year. Hopefully with Chad Morris as his offensive coordinator, but whatever. And then obviously Arkansas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State hiring new coaches. They're not going to fire anybody. South Carolina possibly, but
I was thinking about that too.
They're kind of outperforming my expectations for them.
Outperforming expectations at 2 and 3.
They're outperforming my expectations for them.
I thought Arkansas's in that same boat, but I don't think it's not apples to apples there.
What is this, the 5th year of Muschamp?
He's been there a while. I know that.
And yeah, South Carolina has a thing about taking retread coaches. Lou Holtz, the whole ball coach, Spurrier, Muschamp.
Yep.
They have a thing. All right. Well, I think that Vanderbilt, is the most likely one. I think that Tennessee will figure something out and not fire Pruitt after this year.
You think they'll be able to get back on track the back half of the schedule?
Yeah, I think so. Let's take a look at Tennessee's back half of the schedule. Well, they're going to go Arkansas A&M. Well, that's not great. And then Auburn. And then Vanderbilt, Florida. Maybe I should have looked at the schedule before I said that. They need to win against Arkansas. If you're Tennessee and you want to get back on track this year, you have to come out of Fayetteville with a win. After losing 3 straight, you blundered the beginning of your schedule.
I think there are enough games that are toss-ups or potentially winnable. Like Arkansas is one of those games. I think that's a really tone-setting game. Kind of like Matt said, that this is, Tennessee fans are viewing this as a really big game, a winnable game where you can kind of right the ship a little bit. And Jeremy Pruitt needs a big win on the road. After you start the season as well as you did, and then, 2.5 games into the season, you're feeling really good because third game, you're leading Georgia at halftime. And then things kind of fall apart. You lose 3 straight rivalry games. And then if you go on the road and lose to an Arkansas team that is granted playing well, but you feel like you should, like if you're a quality team, you should be able to beat Arkansas. Auburn is another toss-up. Like that's going to be I'm still not sold on Auburn. I'm just not like, if that game was at Tennessee, I would probably pick Tennessee because Bo Nix doesn't play well on the road. But I would probably say that a lot of Tennessee fans aren't totally sold on Auburn. They probably feel like they might have a chance in that when you should beat Vanderbilt, and then you get Florida at home. So I don't know. That's a tough back half of the schedule minus Vanderbilt.
I'm still putting it on. I'm not a Tennessee fan or a Tennessee person that follows their program just super close, obviously. I'm still putting it all on this game. I think that's how big this game is for Tennessee. And if you're Arkansas, I think you got to come out and you got to be ready for that. This is still a winnable game. This is still a toss-up basically in Vegas. This is still a game that you are not outmatched, kind of like we've seen them be against A&M in the second half of Georgia. This is a game that you can compete in. Now, are you? And I think that's kind of a good place to leave the podcast here is Arkansas has the potential. Will they play to it? Because Tennessee, I don't think they have a choice but to come out fully focused.
How does Arkansas respond after kind of getting beaten soundly for, I don't know, maybe the first time? Like you were in the season opener against Georgia for basically 3 quarters, and then it kind of got away from you. But Texas A&M was pretty sound all the way through. How does Arkansas respond to that? And does Felipe Franks continue to play well and carry his road performances to Razorback Stadium? It's going to be a storyline to watch.
All right, Scotty. Thanks so much for joining us here on the WholeHog Podcast. For Scotty Borderline, I am Seth Campbell saying thank you for joining us. You have a lot of options when you listen to podcasts, so we really appreciate you listening to ours here on the WholeHog Podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, preferably, if you want to rate us as well, wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. You can also go to WholeHogSports.com for all of the coverage of Arkansas's upcoming game against Tennessee. Scotty will be there in person. It's going to be our eyes and ears in the COVID shortened attendance, limited attendance for the Razorback games. All right, well, for Scotty Borderline, I am Seth Campbell saying so long, and we will see you back here next week.